Weliwita Sri Saranankara Thero, Weliwita Asaranasarana Sri Saranankara Sangharaja Thero 19 June 1698 18 July 1778, or popularly Weliwita Sri Saranankara Thero, was a Buddhist monk who was the last Sangharaja of Sri Lanka. He was the pioneer in the revival in Sri Lanka of Buddhism in Sri Lanka, after the decline of the religion in the 17th and 18th centuries. Saranankara Thero was bestowed with the title by King Kirthi Sri Rajasinghe in 1753. The same year, he received the Upasampada higher ordination of Buddhist monks and re-established the Upasampada in Sri Lanka with the help of Mahasangha in Siam. He is also credited with the establishment of Silvath Samagama pious group, a union of monks who lived in accordance with the Buddhist monastic discipline. Early years. Weliwita Sri Saranankara Thero was born on June 19, 1698 in Weliwita Wath, Tumpain, Hatharaliada, about 24 km from Kandy. His father was a chieftain and was a descendant of an influential family. At the age of 16, he was ordained as a Samanera at the Suryagoda temple in Kandy by the name Weliwita Saranankara. Weliwita Sri Saranankara Samanera received the Upasampada and qualified as a higher ordained monk on the Asalapoya day in 1753 at the Malwatu Mahaviharaya. King Kirthi Sri Rajasinghe and his ministers proceeded to Malwata Viharaya and presented Weliwita Sri Saranankara Thero with the insignia of the office of Sangharaja in a grand assembly of Buddhist monks. Weliwita Sri Saranankara Thero was the last Sri Lankan monk. This family had held administrative positions in the Uva de Savania for centuries according to books such as Sangharaja, Sangharaja Sadacharyawa, and other sources found in the Pathgila of the Temple of the Sacred Tooth Relic, Kandy. Though his parents initially opposed his idea to enter the Buddhist monastic order, later he was granted permission by parents and was ordained as a Samanera at the age of 16 under the scholar monk. His teacher Suryagoda Rajaguru Thera, who had received Upasampada ordination from the Arakanese monks Burmese in 1679, exercised considerable influence within the Kandyan kingdom, and had the patronage of King Veera Narendra Singh 1707-39. He was the last Sinhala king, after whom Nayakar dynasty succeeded to the throne of Kandyan kingdom. In 1715, Suryagoda Thera was charged with treason by the king and executed. Thus young Saranankara Samanera, left on his own, took up residence in the mountainous region of Alagala Kajagan, a few miles away from Kandy, and devoted his early years to learning Pali language. Saranankara Samanera lived in a cave at Alagala, and the villagers provided him with alms food. During that time, almost all the Buddhist clergy were known as Ganananses or as Samaneras, as there was no way of them receiving the Upasampada to qualify as a fully ordained bhikkhu. Higher ordination Upasampada became defunct in the era as a result of the decline of Buddhism due to colonial invasion of the maritime provinces of Sri Lanka. Education of the novice monks has been neglected, as there was no one capable to teach the basic components of Pali grammar. Weliwita Saranankara Samanera was able to learn the principles of Pali grammar from Levyuk Ralahami, who had studied it from Wetabilu Thera. His tutor Luke Ralahami was one who had been imprisoned by the king in a village close to Alagala, where Saranankara Samanera resided after the execution of his teacher Suryagoda Thera. With great effort and devotion, he expanded his knowledge in Pali language and Buddhist doctrine, for which purpose he traveled from place to place in search of books and tutors. Later, he went about preaching Buddha Dhamma to encourage others to rise up for the welfare of the religion. This behavior of Weliwita Saranankara Samanera made him popular as a teacher as well as a preacher. In addition to his skill as a scholar, he was also known for his austere practices, kindness, purity of thought, and attachment to religious life, which were rare qualities. His habit to help the poor earned him the epithet Asaranasarana, the one who helps the helpless. Although the Buddhist clergy known as Gananants were living like laymen and forgotten their sacred calling, they were getting their alms to the temples regularly. The young Saranankara Samanera, as an objection against the manner in which Gananances lived in that era, refused to accept the food that brought to the temples, and led an exemplary life of real priesthood. He depended for his sustenance on the ancient practice of Buddhist monks known as pindapata, gathering one's food from house to house in his alms bowl. Because of this practice, he earned the epithet Pindapathaka Saranankara. During this period few like-minded companions and followers began to gather around Weliwita Sri Saranankara Samanera. The earliest and most intimate of them were Sitinamalu Damajathi, Ilapangamu and Kataragoda, who came from the south of the island. They formed themselves into a small fraternity called Silvath Samagama, and its members were called Silvatinas, pious ones, distinguishing themselves from other Samaneras and Gananances. Weliwita Saranankara Samanera's lifelong ambition was to re-establish Upasampada ordination in the island. Revival of Upasampada. The behavior of the Buddhist monks in the early 18th century in Sri Lanka was deeply deteriorated and did not conform to the Vinaya, monastic discipline accepted for the bhikkhus. Most of them had close association with women, and some had children by them. In view of their immoral behavior, they did not receive either the reverence or the honor of the laity, who ignominiously called them Ganai, or Ganaya, who differed from the laity only by their yellow robe. At that point of time there were no erudite monks to deliver discourses to the laity, and it was very difficult to find 5 higher ordained Buddhist monks to offer a Sanghika Dana alms-giving in the entire country. Gananants only read the Jatakapatha book on the previous lives of the Buddha to the laymen who assembled to hear the discourses on Dhamma. The main reason for the decline of Buddhism during this period was mainly due to the infiltration of Catholicism, which spread because of the tolerance of the kings, who gave a free hand to the missionaries to spread their faith. This decline further increased with the division of the Buddhist monks into 2 groups as Silvats and Gananances. The Portuguese and Dutch influence in the Kandyan kingdom over the Sinhalese were such that the Sinhalese began to assimilate foreign customs, ways of life, dress and language, resulting in transformation of their local lifestyle. It was inevitable that these foreign customs seeped into the Buddhist monks as well. During this period Weliwita Sri Saranankara Samanera, who led the Silvat monks who behaved according to the monastic discipline, was entrusted with the task of tutoring Prince Vijaya Rajasinghe, young brother-in-law of King Viranaradresinghe. Since the king had no children from his main consort, the young brother-in-law of the king was the next in line for the throne of Kandyan kingdom. With the appointment of Vijaya Rajasinghe to the throne in 1739, Weliwita Sri Saranankara had the opportunity to make a direct influence to the king. He managed to persuade the king by 1741 to negotiate with the Dutch, who were ruling maritime provinces, to accommodate a delegation. The king got the assistance of the Dutch to send a delegation to Siam, which was unsuccessful. Several members of the delegation died when the ship they traveled sank on the way, while the survivors returned to Sri Lanka. A second delegation, which was dispatched in 1745, led by one of the survivors of the first delegation, successfully reached Siam, but could not conclude the negotiations due to the untimely death of the king Vijaya Rajasinghe. The king of Siam was reluctant to send Siamese monks to revive the monastic lineage of Sri Lanka without knowing what the attitude of the new king would be in this matter. After the demise of King Vijaya Rajasinghe in 1747, Kirthi Sri Rajasinghe was appointed as the king of Kandyan kingdom. The reign of King Kirthi Sri Rajasinghe brought a new energy to the revival of Buddhism in Sri Lanka. Weliwita Sri Saranankara Samanera extended his fullest cooperation to the new king, who depended on him for advice, guidance, and inspiration. He urged the king to send a 3rd embassy to Siam with the help of Dutch East India Company for the revival of Upasampada. The 3rd delegation, which left Kandy in July 1751, made it to Trincomalee and left Sri Lanka's shores later in the same month. The mission was successful, and the new king of Siam, Boramakat, accepted the request of King Kirthi Sri Rajasinghe and sent a delegation of 20, headed by Upali Mahathera, to Sri Lanka. 2 years later, the delegation with Upali Thero was able to set sail back. The delegation, which was headed by Upali Thero, composed of higher ordained Siamese monks, who entered Kandy in June 1753. Appointed Sangharaja. At the age of 55 years, Weliwita Sri Saranankara Thero received the Upasampada and qualified as a higher ordained monk on the Asalapoya Day in 1753 at the Malwatu Mahaviharaya. King Kirthi Sri Rajasinghe and his ministers proceeded to Malwata Viharaya and presented Weliwita Sri Saranankara Thero with the insignia of the office of Sangharaja in a grand assembly of Buddhist monks. Weliwita Sri Saranankara Thero was the last Sri Lankan monk. After becoming the Sangharaja, he was involved extensively with activities to revive the Buddhisasana by assisting the monks, in particular the Samanera or novice monks, to pursue their learning and service to the nation. He was not interested in material possessions such as land, buildings, and property in general. His interest was focused on the development and the welfare of the monks that he led in Sri Lanka. He traveled extensively in the country, especially in the south, to organize and restore the former prestige of the Buddhism and Buddhist monks in Sri Lanka. After rendering a great service to the Buddhisasana by re-establishing the higher ordination ritual of Upasampada in the country, Weliwita Sri Saranankara Mahathira died at the age of 80 on the full moon Poya Day in July 1778. He died at the forest hermitage near Hantana while observing vast retreat. It was his favorite forest abode, which is situated a few miles from Kandy. He was listening to the Sathapatthana with right mindfulness, recited by Malimbada Gunarathana Thero at the time of his death. Literary works. The activities of Weliwita Sri Saranankara Thero led to the re-establishment of Upasampada higher ordination and restored the purity of the Buddhism in the country. In addition to that, his leadership and influence also brought a literary revival as a result of the impetus given by him to the education of Pali language and Buddhist teachings. Weliwita Sri Saranankara Thero compiled many important religious literary works, and several other pupils of Weliwita Sri Saranankara Thero also composed many literary works. The books such as the Munigunalankara, a Sinhalese poem in praise of Buddha, the Sarartha Sangraha, a treatise on various doctrinal teachings of Buddhist philosophy, and Upasampada, a Pali poem on the life of Bodhisattva from the times of Dipankara Buddha up to his enlightenment, are some examples for his religious literary work. The Madhurartha Prakasini, which is a Sinhalese commentarial paraphrase to the Pali Mahabodhivamsa, and the Rupamala, a work on Pali grammar, are also his literary creations.